In a freezing frontier town where dignity was bought and sold like cattle, three Chinese sisters stood on an auction block while a greedy merchant named Edgar Holt hawked them to the highest bidder. The eldest, Mei Lin Zhao, held her trembling sisters close as crude men circled like wolves. Then a silent rancher named Nathan Hale did something nobody expected. He claimed all three. What followed would shake the entire territory, a battle between greed and honor, lies and truth, that would end in a courtroom where one woman's testimony could destroy them all or set them free. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The wind that swept through Bentley Creek that January morning carried more than snow. It carried shame. Mei Lin Zhao stood on the wooden platform outside Holt's general store, with her arms wrapped around her two younger sisters, feeling every eye in town burning into her skin. Her fingers were numb, not from the cold, but from gripping Lena and Suyin so tightly she feared she might hurt them. But she couldn't let go. If she let go, they might be torn away from her forever. "Now then, gentlemen," Edgar Holt announced, his voice booming across the gathered crowd with practiced showmanship. As I was saying, these three young ladies find themselves in need of, shall we say, proper Christian guardianship. Mei Lin's jaw tightened. Christian guardianship. The words tasted like ash. What Holt meant was cheap labor, or worse. She'd seen it happen before in the mining camps. Girls like them, orphaned and foreign, passed around like property until they disappeared entirely. "The youngest there is barely 10, Holt continued, gesturing toward Suyin, who buried her face in Mei Lin's worn coat. "Biddable age. The middle one's 13, old enough to earn her keep, and the eldest—" He paused, his cold eyes sliding over Mei Lin with an assessment that made her skin crawl. "Well, she's 22. Past prime for some tastes, but strong as an ox. Good for heavy work." A few men in the crowd chuckled. Mei Lin felt Lena trembling against her side. "How much?" someone called out. Now, Holt raised his hands in mock humility. "This isn't a sale, friend. This is an act of charity. I'm simply asking for a man of means to step forward and assume responsibility for their care. A small reimbursement for the considerable expense I've incurred feeding and housing them these past 3 months would be appreciated." Lies. All lies. They'd been at Holt's store for 3 months, true enough, sleeping in an unheated storage room eating table scraps, working from dawn until long past dark. Mei Lin's hands bore the scars of it, burns from the stove, cuts from broken crates, calluses from scrubbing floors. And now that winter had truly set in and business was slow, Holt had decided they were more trouble than they were worth. So here they stood, displayed like merchandise. "I'll take the little one," a voice rang out. Mei Lin's head snapped up to see Buck Morrison stepping forward, a rancher known for working his help half to death. $20. 20? Holt's eyebrows shot up. "My good man, surely you can—" "The middle girl," another man interrupted. 25 and I'll take her today." No. Mei Lin pulled her sisters closer, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She opened her mouth to protest, but what could she say? What rights did she have here? She was foreign, orphaned, penniless. In the eyes of these men, she was nothing. "Excellent." Holt was beaming now, scenting profit. "Now, what about the eldest? Surely someone—" "I'll take her." The voice was quiet, almost lost beneath the wind, but something about it cut through the noise like a blade through silk. The crowd shifted, parting to reveal a tall man in a worn coat, his hat pulled low against the snow. Nathan Hale. Mei Lin had seen him before, briefly, when he'd come to town for supplies. He never spoke to anyone, never lingered. He bought what he needed and left, his wagon loaded, his expression unreadable. The other men gave him space, whether out of respect or wariness, she couldn't tell. "Hale." Holt's smile flickered with uncertainty. "I didn't expect to see you here." "How much?" Nathan's voice was low, steady. "Well, for the eldest, I'd say $40 would be—" "I'll give you 100. The crowd went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Holt blinked, his greed and suspicion warring visibly across his face. $100 for one girl? That's generous. Not for one. Nathan stepped closer to the platform, and for the first time Mei Lin could see his face clearly beneath the hat's brim. It was a hard face, weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were calm, gray-blue like winter sky. For all three. Maylene's breath caught. Now hold on just a minute, Buck Morrison protested. I already bid on the $100, Nathan repeated, his gaze never leaving Holt's face. Cash. Right now. For all three sisters together. The word together hit Maylene like a physical blow. She felt Lena's grip on her coat loosen slightly, felt Suyin's face turn upward with fragile hope. Holt's eyes narrowed. That's highly irregular. These men have already made offers. These men made offers for children they'd separate from their family, Nathan said, his voice still quiet but carrying an edge now. I'm offering you more money than all of them combined, for all three, as a family. You planning to turn that down? For a long moment, Holt stared at Nathan, weighing something Maylene couldn't identify. Then his merchant smile returned, oily and satisfied. Well, when you put it that way, Mr. Hale, I suppose I can't refuse such a generous offer. He turned to the crowd with spread hands. Gentlemen, I'm sure you understand. Business is business. Buck Morrison spat in the snow and stalked away. The other man swore under his breath but didn't argue. They knew better than to push Nathan Hale. Whatever reputation he carried, it was enough to make them back down. Nathan climbed the 3 steps to the platform. Up close, he was taller than Maylene had realized, and broader through the shoulders. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat and counted out bills into Holt's eager palm. Pleasure doing business, Holt said, his voice dripping false warmth. Nathan didn't respond. He turned to Maylene, and for the first time their eyes met directly. She didn't know what she expected to see there. Lust, cruelty, ownership. But what she found was something else entirely. Something that looked almost like apology. You have belongings? He asked. Maylene's voice came out rougher than she intended. Only what we're wearing. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. Then he did something that shocked her. He touched the brim of his hat, a small gesture of respect, and stepped back to give them space. My wagon's there, he said, pointing to a sturdy flatbed hitched to 2 dark horses. We've got a long ride ahead. You'll want to get settled. He walked away, leaving them standing on the platform. Maylene didn't move immediately. Her mind was racing, trying to understand what had just happened. This man, this stranger, had just paid a small fortune for them. Why? What did he want? What would he expect in return? May, Lena whispered, what do we do? What choice did they have? Stay here and be separated? Run into the wilderness and freeze? At least with Nathan Hale, they would be together. At least they had that. We go with him, Maylene said quietly. She squeezed both her sister's hands. Stay close to me. Don't speak unless spoken to. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you run. Understand? They both nodded, though Suyin's eyes were wide with fear. The walk to the wagon felt like miles, though it was barely 20 yards. Every person they passed stared at them, whispered. Maylene held her head high, refusing to let them see her terror. Nathan was checking the horses' harnesses when they approached. He glanced up, then reached into the wagon bed and pulled out several thick blankets. It's a 3-hour ride, he said, offering the blankets to Maylene. You'll want these. Gets colder once we leave town. Maylene took them carefully, searching his face for hidden intent. She found none. Up you go, Nathan said, gesturing to the wagon bed. He'd already laid down a canvas tarp and several grain sacks for cushioning. Maylene helped Suayan up first, then Lena. She was about to climb up herself when Nathan extended his hand to help her. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was strong but brief. He released her the moment she was steady. He moved to the front of the wagon and climbed onto the driver's bench. With a soft click of his tongue, the horses began to move. Bentley Creek fell away behind them. The first hour passed in silence. Maylene kept her sisters close, the blankets wrapped tight around all 3 of them. The landscape beyond town was vast and empty, rolling white plains broken by distant dark lines of trees. The sky was the color of old iron. She studied the back of Nathan's head, trying to understand him. He sat perfectly still as he drove, his posture relaxed but alert. He didn't look back at them, didn't speak, just guided the horses with quiet competence. Who was this man? Maylene, Suyin whispered in Mandarin, her native tongue. I'm scared. I know, little one, Maylin pulled her closer. But we're together. That's what matters. What does he want with us? Lena asked, also in Mandarin. I don't know yet. Do you think he'll hurt us? Maylin's throat tightened. I won't let him. But even as she said it, she knew the words were hollow. What could she do against a man that size? In this wilderness. She had no weapon, no knowledge of the land, no resources. They were completely at his mercy. Another hour passed. The cold deepened. Despite the blankets, Maylin could feel it seeping into her bones. Beside her, Suyin had stopped shivering. A bad sign. The little girl's lips were turning blue. Mr. Hale, Maylin called out, her voice cracking from disuse. He turned slightly, not fully looking back. Yes? My youngest sister, she's very cold. Is there somewhere we could stop just for a moment? Nathan looked at the sky, calculating something. Then he nodded and guided the horses off the main trail toward a cluster of pine trees that offered some shelter from the wind. When the wagon stopped, he climbed down and came around to the back. He looked at Suyin, whose small face was pinched and pale, and something shifted in his expression. Wait here, he said. He moved to a wooden chest bolted to the side of the wagon and opened it. Inside were tools, rope, and Maylin's eyes widened. A small tin stove and a bag of coal. Within minutes, Nathan had the compact stove assembled and lit, the precious heat radiating outward. He set it carefully in the wagon bed on a metal plate, positioned so the smoke would drift away from them. Keep your hands close, but not touching, he instructed. Frostbite comes fast out here. Suyin immediately huddled near the stove, and color began returning to her cheeks. Thank you, Maylin said quietly. Nathan nodded and returned to the driver's bench, but before he picked up the reins again, he reached beneath the seat and pulled out a wrapped bundle. He tossed it back to them without comment. Maylin caught it and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was bread, cheese, and dried meat. A simple meal, but more food than they'd seen in days. Eat, Nathan said, his back to them. Still got another hour before we reach the ranch. The sisters ate in silence, the food settling warm in their empty stomachs. The small stove crackled softly, its heat a small miracle. Maylin watched Nathan's shoulders as he drove, the easy way he handled the reins, the calm certainty of his movements. Nothing about him suggested cruelty or violence, but she'd learned long ago that appearances could lie. The landscape began to change as they traveled. The flat plains gave way to gentle hills, then deeper valleys. Trees grew thicker here, dark pines heavy with snow. In the distance, Maylin could see mountains rising like jagged teeth against the horizon. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward those distant peaks, Nathan guided the wagon down a narrow path that wound between two hills. And there, in a small valley protected on three sides by rising slopes, stood a ranch. It was simpler than Maylin had expected. A single-story house built from rough-hewn logs, a barn of similar construction, a few smaller outbuildings. A split-rail fence enclosed what must be pasture in warmer months, now buried under snow. Smoke rose from the house's chimney. Someone had kept the fire going. Nathan brought the wagon to a stop near the house and climbed down. He came around to the back and extinguished the small stove, then lowered the wagon's gate. Welcome to the Double H, he said simply. Maylin helped her sisters down, their legs stiff from the long ride. They stood in the snow, staring at the house that would be what? Their prison? Their home? It was impossible to know. Nathan was already moving toward the house. He opened the door and stood aside, waiting. It's warm inside, he said when they didn't move. And there's food. Come on. Slowly, Maylin led her sisters forward. She expected the interior to match the rough exterior, but she was wrong. The main room was simple but clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames dancing behind an iron grate. A wooden table with 4 chairs sat in the center, and against the far wall stood a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove. The floor was wood plank, worn smooth by years of use but well swept. Handmade rugs provided warmth underfoot. But what caught Maylin's attention was the care evident in small details. The neatly stacked firewood, the clean dishes drying beside the basin, the absence of dust or disorder. This was a man's house, but not a careless man. There's 2 bedrooms, Nathan said, moving to stoke the fire. The back one's yours, all 3 of you. I sleep in the front one. He paused, then added carefully, the door has a lock from the inside. Maylene's eyes snapped to his face. He was looking at the fire, not at her, but his meaning was clear. He was giving them safety, privacy, protection. From him. I don't, Maylene's voice faltered. I don't understand. Nathan straightened, brushing ash from his hands. For the first time since they'd met, he looked directly at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not lust, not ownership, weariness, and something that might have been loneliness. You're safe here, he said quietly. That's all you need to understand tonight. Tomorrow, we'll talk more. For now, get warm, get fed, rest. He moved toward the front bedroom, then paused at the door. There's clothes in the trunk at the foot of your bed. They were my sister's. She was about your size. His voice went quiet. She doesn't need them anymore. Before Maylene could ask what that meant, he disappeared into his room and closed the door behind him. The 3 sisters stood in the warm house, listening to the fire crackle, trying to process everything that had happened. May? Lena whispered. What do we do? Maylene looked around the room, at the food on the shelves, the warmth of the fire, the door to the bedroom that Nathan said had a lock, at the small signs of care that suggested this was not a place of cruelty. We do what he said, she answered softly. We rest. And tomorrow we'll see what kind of man Nathan Hale really is. That first night, none of them slept well. The bedroom Nathan had given them was small but clean, with a large bed covered in quilts and the promised trunk at its foot. Maylene had checked the lock on the door immediately. It was solid, well made. Real protection, not an illusion of it. They'd found the clothes Nathan mentioned, simple dresses, undergarments, warm stockings, all carefully folded and smelling of cedar. They were too large for Lena and Suyin, but fit Maylene almost perfectly. The sight of them made her throat tight with questions she had no answers for. Who was Nathan's sister? What had happened to her? Suyin fell asleep first, exhausted by fear and cold and the overwhelming strangeness of everything. Lena followed soon after, curled against Maylene's side. But Maylene lay awake in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, wind against the walls, the settling of logs, the distant call of some night creature. And footsteps, Nathan moving through the main room tending the fire, then silence. Then more footsteps, pacing maybe, or just restless movement. She wondered if he couldn't sleep either, wondered what thoughts kept him awake. Finally, near dawn, exhaustion claimed her. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Maylene sat up carefully, not wanting to wake her sisters. Pale light filtered through the small window, morning, though the sun hadn't fully risen. She could hear sounds from the main room, the clatter of a pan, the soft thud of wood being added to the fire. She slipped out of bed and pulled on one of the dresses from the trunk, her own clothes being too worn and filthy for another day. When she opened the bedroom door, she found Nathan at the stove, cooking. He glanced up when she entered, nodded once, and returned his attention to the pan. Coffee's hot, he said. Cups are in the cupboard there. Maylene poured herself a cup with shaking hands. The coffee was strong and black, and it burned all the way down in the best possible way. Your sister's still sleeping? Nathan asked. Yes? Good. Let them rest. He slid bacon onto a plate, then cracked eggs into the pan. You and I need to talk. Maylene's stomach clenched. Here it was. Whatever he really wanted from them, he was about to reveal it. She sat at the table, wrapping her hands around the warm cup, and waited. Nathan finished cooking, divided the food onto 2 plates, and brought them to the table. He sat across from her, his movements deliberate and unhurried. You're wondering why I brought you here, he said. Yes? He took a sip of coffee, considering his words. This ranch is too much for one man to run properly. I need help, the kind of help I can trust. You could hire men, ranch hands. I could, Nathan agreed, but men talk. Men cause trouble, and I don't... He paused, searching for words. I don't do well with people. Maylene studied his face. In the morning light, she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. He was older than she'd first thought, maybe 40, and there was something in his expression that spoke of old wounds, old losses. "What do you want from us?" she asked bluntly. "Work," he said simply. "Honest work for honest pay. You'll help with the house, the cooking, the garden come spring. Your sisters too, as they're able. In return, you'll have food, shelter, safety, and wages." Maylene's hand stilled on her cup. "Wages?" $20 a month, for all three of you together. He met her eyes steadily. "It's not much, I know, but it's more than most women get, and it's yours free and clear. Save it, spend it, do what you want, no strings." $20 a month. Maylene's mind raced. In a year, that would be nearly $240. Enough to, what? Buy passage somewhere? Start over? Actually build a future? "Why?" she whispered. Nathan looked down at his plate, his jaw working. "I told you about my sister. Her name was Sarah. She was like you, proud, strong. When our parents died, she kept this ranch running when I was too young to do it alone." His voice grew rougher. 3 years ago, she went to town for supplies. On the way back, her wagon overturned, broke her neck. She died alone on the road in the cold. Maylene's breath caught. The men in town found her the next day. They brought her back here, said all the right words of sympathy, but not one of them had stopped to help her when she needed it. Not one. Nathan's hands curled into fists on the table. "I watched what happened to her clothes, her belongings, vultures, all of them. And I swore I'd never be like that. Never let someone suffer if I had the power to stop it." He looked up at Maylene, and she saw raw honesty in his eyes. "When I saw you standing on that platform, protecting your sisters, looking like you'd fight every man there with your bare hands if you had to." He shook his head. "You reminded me of Sarah, and those bastards were going to split you up, sell you off like cattle. I couldn't let that happen." Silence fell between them, heavy with meaning. "So that's the truth," Nathan said quietly. "I need help on this ranch, yes. But more than that, I need to know that Sarah's room, her space, her memory, is being used for something good, for keeping a family together instead of apart." Maylene felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "What are the rules?" she asked, her voice stronger now. "Rules? You said we're safe here, but there must be expectations, boundaries." Nathan nodded slowly, seeming to appreciate her directness. "All right, rules. You'll work hard. I expect that. This ranch requires it, but you'll also rest. No working yourself sick. Your sisters will help as they're able, but Suyan's just a child. She needs time to be a child." He paused, then continued. "You'll have privacy. Your room is yours. I won't enter without permission. Ever." The firmness in his voice left no room for doubt. "You'll eat what I eat, share the fire, take what you need from the stores. This isn't a prison. It's a home. Your home, for as long as you want it to be. And if we want to leave?" Nathan's expression didn't change. "Then you leave. I'll take you to town myself. Make sure you have every penny you've earned. No man owns another person, Miss Zhao. Not anymore. Not here." Maylene searched his face for deception and found none. This man, this strange, solitary rancher, actually meant what he said. "One more thing," Nathan added. "The town. They're going to talk. Already are, probably. They'll say things about you, about me, about this arrangement. Ugly things." His jaw tightened. "I can't stop that. But I can tell you that their words don't matter. Not here. What matters is the work we do, the life we build. Everything else is just noise." Maylene took a deep breath. They had nothing. No money, no options, nowhere else to go. But Nathan was offering them something she'd thought impossible. Dignity, choice, a future. "We accept," she said firmly. "Your terms are fair. We'll work hard. We'll earn our keep." Nathan's shoulders relaxed slightly, and something that might have been relief crossed his face. "Good. That's good." He pushed his plate aside and stood. "I'll show you around the ranch after breakfast. You'll need to know where everything is, how everything works." The bedroom door opened and Lena and Suyan emerged, rubbing sleep from their eyes. They froze when they saw Nathan, instinctively moving closer together. "Morning," Nathan said simply. Then he moved to the stove and began fixing 2 more plates. "Hungry?" The sisters looked to Maylene for guidance. She nodded, and slowly they came to the table. As Nathan served them food, more food than they'd seen in months, Maylene watched her sisters' faces transform from fear to tentative hope. Watched them eat slowly at first, then faster, as they realized no one was going to take it away. And she thought, maybe this could work. Maybe, against all odds, they'd found a place where they could breathe again. The morning sun climbed higher, spilling golden light through the windows. Outside, the snow sparkled like scattered diamonds. And inside the small ranch house in the middle of nowhere, 3 orphaned sisters and a lonely rancher shared their first meal together. The first of many, though none of them knew it yet. The story of what they would build together and the battles they would face to protect it was only beginning. The first week at the Double H passed in a blur of discovery and cautious adjustment. Nathan proved to be a man of precise routine. He rose before dawn, started the fire, made coffee, and was already outside tending the animals by the time the sisters emerged from their room. He worked until the light failed, came in for supper, and retired to his room with barely a dozen words spoken. It wasn't coldness, Maylene realized. It was simply who he was. A man more comfortable with silence than speech, with action than explanation. But his silence spoke volumes in other ways. On the second morning, Maylene found a bucket of hot water outside their bedroom door, soap and clean towels beside it. Nathan was already gone to the barn, having carried the water from the stove without waking them, without expecting thanks or acknowledgement. On the third day, she discovered he'd cleared a section of the barn and set up a workspace with a small stove, old furniture, and cleaning supplies. When she asked about it, he'd simply said, "Thought you might want somewhere to do the heavy work, warmer than outside." On the 5th day, she caught him teaching Suyin how to feed the chickens, his large hands gentle as he showed her how to scatter the grain, his voice low and patient as he explained why they needed to check for eggs twice daily. The little girl had actually laughed, a sound Maylene hadn't heard in months. It was during the 6th evening, as Maylene prepared supper while Nathan mended harness leather at the table, that the comfortable silence between them finally broke. "You don't have to do all the cooking," Nathan said, not looking up from his work. Maylene paused in her stirring. "It's part of the arrangement. The arrangement is that you help, not that you do everything alone." He set down the leather and met her eyes. "Tomorrow, I'll teach you how to handle the horses. Day after, you can start learning the land, where the property lines are, which paths are safe in winter, where the creek runs. You'll need to know these things." "Why would I need to know the land?" "Because this is your home now," Nathan said simply, "and you should know your own home." The word home settled in Maylene's chest like a warm stone. That night, lying in the darkness with her sisters sleeping beside her, Maylene allowed herself to think the dangerous thought she'd been pushing away all week. What if this is real? What if we're truly safe here? The thought terrified her more than any threat could have. Safety meant lowering her guard. Trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the potential for devastating loss. But as the days turned into weeks, the fragile rhythm of their new life began to solidify into something stronger. Nathan taught Maylene to handle the horses. First the gentle mare named Cassie, then the more spirited gelding, Shadow. He showed her how to read their moods, how to approach them with confidence, how to check their hooves for stones and their coats for injury. His instructions were clear and patient, never condescending, always respectful of her intelligence. Lena discovered a talent for organization, taking over the management of the root cellar and dry goods storage. She cataloged everything with meticulous care, creating a system that even Nathan admitted was better than his own haphazard method. Suyin, slowly emerging from her shell of fear, began to bloom. She named all the chickens, talked to the barn cats, and followed Nathan around like a small shadow whenever he allowed it. He never seemed to mind, answering her endless questions with the same quiet patience he showed the animals. And Maylene threw herself into transforming the ranch house from a functional shelter into a true home. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, washed windows until they sparkled with light, aired out quilts and beat rugs and organized cupboards. She found Sarah's old recipe book in a kitchen drawer and began experimenting with dishes she'd never attempted before. Bread that actually rose, stews rich with herbs, pies made from preserved fruit. Nathan noticed. He didn't say much, but she'd catch him pausing in doorways, looking at the clean windows or the fresh cloth on the table, something unreadable in his expression. Once she found him holding one of Sarah's old aprons that Maylene had mended and washed, his thumb rubbing the repaired seam with an almost reverent touch. "She would have liked you," he'd said quietly, then hung the apron back on its hook and walked away before Maylene could respond. The work was hard, harder than anything Maylene had done at Holt's store. But there was a difference. Here, the work had purpose. Here, she could see the results of her labor in the warmth of the house, the health of her sisters, the slow building of something that felt like dignity. Winter deepened around them. Snow piled high against the barn walls, and some mornings the cold was so fierce that Nathan had to break ice from the water troughs with an axe. They settled into a pattern, early mornings tending animals together, afternoons working on separate tasks, evenings around the fire after supper. It was during one of these evenings, nearly a month after their arrival, that the outside world intruded again. Nathan had gone to the barn to check on a cow he worried might be sick. Maylene was teaching Lena a card game their mother had taught them years ago, while Suyin drew pictures in the ash at the edge of the fireplace. The knock at the door startled them all. Maylene's heart jumped into her throat. They never had visitors. The ranch was too remote, too far from town. She moved to the door slowly, her mind racing through possibilities. When she opened it, she found a man she didn't recognize, weathered face, thick coat, a horse stamping nervously behind him in the snow. "Help you?" Maylene asked, keeping her body in the doorway, blocking his view of her sisters. "Need to speak to Nathan Hale," the man said. His eyes swept over her with undisguised curiosity. "He around?" "He's working. Can I take a message?" "It's ranch business. I'll wait." Before Maylene could respond, she heard Nathan's boots crunching through snow. He appeared from around the side of the house, his expression going carefully neutral when he saw the visitor. "Garrett," Nathan said, "wasn't expecting you." "Got news," Garrett replied. "Figured you'd want to hear it straight." Nathan glanced at Maylene. "Go inside, please." The please softened the order, but it was still in order. Maylene hesitated, then nodded and stepped back inside, closing the door. But she stayed close to it, listening. Their voices were muffled, but she could catch fragments. "Talking in town. Those Chinese girls. Not proper. My business, not theirs. Edgar Holt's been saying things, making accusations. Don't give a damn what Holt says." The conversation went on for several more minutes, the tone growing sharper. Finally, she heard Garrett's horse moving away and Nathan's boots on the porch steps. When he came inside, his face was like stone. "What did he want?" Maylene asked. Nathan pulled off his coat with sharp, angry movements. "Gossip. Small-minded people with nothing better to do than worry about other people's lives." "What kind of gossip?" He was silent for a long moment, staring at the fire. Then he sighed, the anger seeming to drain out of him, replaced by weariness. "They're saying things about you, about this arrangement, ugly things." He looked at her directly. "Holt's been telling anyone who'll listen that I took you and your sisters for immoral purposes, that this whole setup is improper." Maylene felt ice crystallize in her stomach. Of course people would think that. A single man, 3 foreign women, living together in isolation. It didn't matter that nothing improper had happened. It didn't matter that they were working for honest wages. Reputation was all that mattered in places like Bentley Creek. "Does it bother you?" she asked quietly. "What they're saying?" Nathan's jaw worked. "It bothers me that they're talking about you that way, that they're making your life harder." He met her eyes. "But it doesn't change anything here, not unless you want it to." "What do you mean?" "I mean, if this situation is putting you in danger, if the talk gets worse, if it affects your reputation so badly that it hurts your future, then we'll figure something else out. I'll take you somewhere else, somewhere they don't know us. Set you up with proper references, enough money to start fresh." His voice was steady, but she could hear the cost of the offer. "I won't trap you here with my stubbornness." Maylene looked around the warm house, at her sisters watching anxiously from the table, at the life they'd begun to build in just 1 month. The thought of leaving made her chest ache. "And if we want to stay?" she asked. Nathan's expression softened slightly. "Then we ignore them. Let them talk. Live our lives the way we know is right, and to hell with their opinions. From the table, Lena spoke up, her voice stronger than Maylene had heard in months. We want to stay. Suyin nodded vigorously. I like it here. I like the chickens. And Barnaby. Barnaby was the orange barn cat she'd adopted as her special friend. Nathan looked at Maylene. And you? Maylene thought about the alternative, going back to a world where they were alone, vulnerable, foreign, where every door might be closed, every hand might push them away. Here, at least, they had one hand extended in genuine help, one place that felt like shelter. We stay, she said firmly. Let them talk. Something that might have been relief crossed Nathan's face. He nodded once, then moved to his room. But at the door, he paused. For what it's worth, he said, not turning around. I'm glad you're staying. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. The next morning, Nathan was quieter than usual, his movements precise and controlled in a way that suggested tightly leashed emotion. After breakfast, as Maylene cleared the table, he spoke without preamble. Need to go to town for supplies tomorrow. We're low on flour, salt, lamp oil. Maylene's hands stilled on the plates. Town meant facing these people who were spreading rumors. It meant walking past their stares and whispers. I'll come with you, she heard herself say. Nathan looked up sharply. That's not necessary. I can... If they're going to talk about us anyway, hiding won't help. Maylene lifted her chin. Better they see we have nothing to be ashamed of. A slow smile crossed Nathan's face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his features, softening the hard lines, reaching his eyes. Sarah used to say the same thing. She never backed down from anything. Your sister sounds like she was formidable. She was. The smile faded, but the warmth remained. All right, we'll go together, but stay close. Some of those men, I can handle their stares, Maylene said. What she didn't say was that she'd been handling stares her whole life, for being foreign, for being orphaned, for being alive, when maybe others wished she wasn't. One more town's judgment wouldn't break her. The trip to Bentley Creek the following day proved her both right and wrong. The ride itself was peaceful, the winter landscape beautiful in its stark white emptiness. Nathan kept the horses to a steady pace, and they made good time. But as they approached the town's outskirts, Maylene felt tension coiling in her spine. Remember, Nathan said quietly, you've done nothing wrong. Hold on to that. They entered Bentley Creek just after midday. The main street was busy with people doing their weekly marketing, and Maylene felt every eye turned toward them. Conversations stopped. People stared openly. Nathan pulled the wagon up in front of Morrison's Mercantile, the only general store besides Holt's, and the one Nathan preferred. He climbed down and came around to help Maylene, his hand steady under her elbow as she descended. The Mercantile door chimed as they entered. Mr. Morrison looked up from behind the counter, his expression flickering between welcome and wariness. Hail, he said with a nod. Then, more carefully, Miss, need flour, salt, lamp oil, Nathan said, pulling out his list, and coffee if you've got the good kind from last month. Morrison nodded and began gathering items, but Maylene could feel his curious glances. Other customers in the store, two women examining fabric, a man looking at tools, had gone conspicuously silent. Maylene moved to examine a display of thread and needles, trying to appear unbothered, but she could hear the whispers starting behind her. Nerve, bringing her to town. Those sisters of hers, too, living out there. What kind of arrangement? Nathan's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. You have something to say, Mrs. Fletcher. Say it to my face. The store went dead silent. One of the women by the fabric, middle-aged with a pinched face and expensive coat, turned to face Nathan. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Mr. Hale. You're whispering about my employee, Nathan said flatly. If you have concerns about how I run my ranch, I'm standing right here. Mrs. Fletcher's face reddened. Employee. Is that what we're calling it now? That's what it is. Nathan's voice was dangerously quiet. Miss Zhao and her sisters work for wages, same as any ranch hand. They have their own quarters, their own privacy, and they're treated with the respect any worker deserves. If you've got evidence of anything else, speak up. Otherwise, I'd appreciate you keeping your speculation to yourself. Well, I never... Exactly, Nathan interrupted. You never asked, never checked, never cared about the truth. You just decided what fit your story and ran with it. He turned to Morrison. How much do I owe you? Morrison tallied the purchases with shaking hands, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. Nathan paid, gathered the supplies, and turned to Maylene. Ready? She nodded, her heart pounding. As they moved toward the door, Mrs. Fletcher couldn't resist one more comment. Mark my words, this will end badly. These kinds of situations always do. Maylene stopped. Nathan's hand touched her elbow in warning, but she shook her head slightly. She turned to face Mrs. Fletcher directly. You're right, Maylene said clearly. Situations where people are treated like property do end badly. That's why I'm grateful to work for a man who sees me as a person with dignity and worth. She met the woman's eyes steadily. I'm sorry you can't imagine such a thing exists. Then she walked out with her head high, Nathan beside her. They loaded the supplies in tense silence. As Nathan helped her up to the wagon seat, she saw his expression. Something between pride and anger, with a hint of grim satisfaction. That was brave, he said quietly. That was necessary, Maylene corrected. They were about to leave when a voice called out, Hale, wait up! Maylene's stomach dropped as Edgar Holt emerged from his store across the street, his face flushed with either cold or anger. We need to talk, Holt said, striding toward them. Nathan's posture went rigid. I've got nothing to say to you, Holt. Well, I've got plenty to say to you. Holt stopped a few feet from the wagon, his eyes hard. You think you're clever, don't you? Taking those girls, setting up your little arrangement out there in the wilderness where no one can see what's really happening. What's really happening, Nathan said, his voice like granite, is that 3 orphaned girls have a safe place to live and honest work. That's all. And it's more than you ever gave them. I gave them shelter when no one else would. You gave them a storage room and table scraps in exchange for slave labor, Nathan shot back. Don't pretend you were doing charity. Holt's face darkened. I want my money back, all of it. Those girls were under my care, and you had no right. I had every right. I paid you fair and square, more than fair. That money's gone, Holt, and you're not getting it back. We'll see about that. Holt's smile was ugly. I've been talking to people, important people. There are laws about these things, about proper guardianship, about the treatment of orphans. You think you can just take children and set up house with them? The territorial magistrate might have questions about that. Maylene felt cold fear spike through her. Legal action, authority, the very things they had no defense against. But Nathan didn't flinch. Let him ask his questions. I've got nothing to hide. Those girls are safe, fed, paid, and treated with respect. Any magistrate worth his position will see that. Will he? Holt's eyes gleamed. Or will he see a single man living in isolation with 3 foreign women? No proper oversight, no chaperone, no... Enough! Nathan gathered the reins. You want to cause trouble, Holt, go ahead and try. But you'll find I don't scare easy, and I don't back down from bullies. Now get out of my way. He clicked to the horses, and they moved forward. Holt had to step back or be run over. As they left town, Maylene risked a glance back. Holt stood in the middle of the street, watching them go, his expression promising trouble. He's going to make problems, she said quietly. Probably, Nathan agreed. Men like him always do when they don't get their way. What will we do? Nathan's jaw was set, his eyes on the road ahead. We'll deal with it when it comes, together. He glanced at her. You regret speaking up back there? No. Good. He almost smiled. Because what you said to Mrs. Fletcher about dignity and worth, that was the truth. And the truth is worth fighting for, even when it's hard. They rode in silence for a while, the town falling away behind them. Finally, Maylene spoke again. Your sister, she said. Sarah. She taught you that, didn't she? About fighting for truth? Nathan's hands tightened on the reins. She taught me a lot of things. How to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. How to see past what people looked like to who they really were. His voice went rough. She would have fought those people in town tooth and nail, would have stood right beside you and dared them to question her integrity. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you, Nathan said again. Then softer. She would have been proud of what you're doing, keeping your family together, working hard, not letting anyone break your spirit. The wagon rolled on through the snow, carrying them back toward the ranch, back toward the life they were building. But Maylene couldn't shake the image of Edgar Holt's face, the promise of retribution in his eyes. Storm clouds were gathering, and she had the terrible feeling they were only beginning to see how bad the weather could get. That night, after her sisters had gone to bed, Maylene sat by the fire, unable to sleep. She was mending one of Nathan's shirts the elbow had worn through, when his door opened and he emerged, also apparently unable to rest. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much thinking." He poured himself coffee from the pot she'd left on the stove and sat at the table. "About Holt?" "About everything." Maylene set down the mending. "About what happens if he does go to the magistrate. About what happens if they decide this arrangement is improper. About where we'd go, what we'd do." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "There might be a way to make this less questionable in the eyes of the law." Maylene looked up. "What do you mean?" He met her eyes, and she saw uncertainty there, unusual for him. "Marriage," he said bluntly. "If you and I were married, legally, then your sisters would be family. There'd be nothing improper about the situation. The law couldn't touch us." Maylin's heart stopped, then started again, too fast. She tried to find words. "That's an extreme solution." "It's a practical solution," Nathan corrected. "It doesn't have to mean anything beyond legal protection. We could keep the same arrangement we have now. Separate rooms, separate lives, just with a piece of paper that says it's legitimate." Maylene studied his face, trying to understand what he was really offering. A marriage of convenience, legal protection, nothing more. Except she'd seen the way he looked at Sarah's things with reverence, the way he'd smiled when Maylene had spoken up to Mrs. Fletcher, the careful respect he showed her, the patience he had with her sisters, the quiet loneliness in his eyes when he thought no one was watching, and she'd felt her own heart soften toward him over these weeks, felt gratitude deepen into respect, and respect into something warmer, something that scared her more than all of Holt's threats combined. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. Nathan nodded. "Of course. It's not a decision to make lightly, and it might not even be necessary. Holt might just be blowing smoke. But if he does go to the magistrate, if this does become a legal problem..." He stood, setting down his untouched coffee. "The offer stands. Think about it." He returned to his room, leaving Maylene alone with her racing thoughts and the dying fire. Marriage. To Nathan Hale. It should have felt like a trap, another form of being sold, but instead it felt like a door opening. To safety, yes, but also to something else. Something she wasn't quite ready to name. She sat by the fire until dawn, the mended shirt forgotten in her lap, trying to imagine a future where she wasn't just surviving, but actually living, and wondering if she was brave enough to reach for it. 3 days passed before Maylene had her answer, and in those 3 days, Edgar Holt made good on his threats. The messenger arrived on a bitter cold afternoon, his horse laboring through deep snow. Maylene saw him coming from the kitchen window where she was kneading bread dough, and her hands stilled as dread pooled in her stomach. Nathan was in the barn repairing a broken stall door, and she watched as the messenger dismounted and headed toward him. Through the window glass, she could see Nathan reading the paper the messenger handed him, his face going hard and still. Money changed hands, payment for the delivery, and then the messenger was gone, leaving Nathan standing alone in the snow staring at the document. When he came inside, his eyes found hers immediately. "It's a summons," he said without preamble. "Magistrate Lawson wants us in town in 4 days. Holt filed a formal complaint alleging improper guardianship and possible exploitation." Maylene's flour-dusted hands gripped the edge of the table. "What does that mean?" "It means we have to answer to the territorial court. Means Holt's convinced someone with authority that there's cause for investigation." Nathan set the paper down, his jaw working. "Means this just got a lot more serious." Lena emerged from the bedroom where she'd been helping Suyin with her letters. "What's happening?" Nathan and Maylene exchanged glances. They tried to shield the younger girls from the worst of the town's gossip, but there was no hiding this. "There's going to be a hearing," Maylene said carefully. "Some people have questions about our arrangement here. We'll have to go to town and answer them." "Will they take us away?" Suyin's small voice came from the bedroom doorway, her eyes huge with fear. No, Nathan said firmly. He crossed to her and knelt down, bringing himself to her level. I promise you, Suyin, I will not let anyone separate your family. You understand me? Suyin nodded, but tears streaked her cheeks. That night, after the girls had finally fallen into restless sleep, Maylene found Nathan outside, despite the cold, leaning against the corral fence and staring at the dark mountains. You'll freeze out here, she said, wrapping a shawl tighter around her shoulders. Can't seem to make myself go inside. His breath clouded in the frigid air. Keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Maylene stood beside him, close enough to share warmth, but not touching. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking that Holt has friends in this territory, men with influence, men who will listen when he paints a picture of an improper situation. Nathan's hands gripped the fence rail. I'm thinking that even if the truth is on our side, truth doesn't always win in a courtroom. And the solution you offered before? Nathan turned to look at her directly. Marriage would change everything. A legal union makes you family, makes your sisters my responsibility by law. Holt's entire case collapses. It feels like running, Maylene said quietly, like hiding behind a lie. It wouldn't be a lie. Nathan's voice was rough. It would be a legal arrangement, yes, but it would also be real. A real commitment to protect your family, to stand together against people like Holt. Maylene studied his face in the moonlight, the sharp angles softened by shadow, the weariness in his eyes. What would you get from it? You'd be taking on responsibility for 3 people who aren't your blood, risking your reputation even further, tying yourself to... To what? Nathan interrupted. To people I care about. To a family that's brought more life into this house in 2 months than it's seen in 3 years? His expression shifted, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. You think I'm doing this out of obligation? Out of some sense of duty to Sarah's memory? Aren't you? Maybe that's how it started, he admitted. But it stopped being about Sarah weeks ago. Now it's about you, about Maylene, who works harder than anyone I've ever known, about Lena, who organized my entire storage system and somehow made it make sense, about Suyin, who named all my chickens and makes me laugh. His voice dropped lower. It's about waking up to voices in the house, to the smell of bread baking, to feeling like this place is actually a home instead of just a building I sleep in. Maylene's throat tightened. Nathan, I'm not asking you to love me, he said quickly. I know this started as a business arrangement, and if that's all it ever is, I can live with that. But I'm asking you to let me stand beside you when you face that courtroom. Let me be the wall they have to go through to get to your family. The wind picked up, carrying snow crystals that caught the moonlight like scattered stars. Maylene thought about the alternative. Standing before a magistrate alone, foreign, with no legal protection, trying to convince men who already saw her as less than fully human that she deserved dignity and choice. Or she could stand beside Nathan, with his quiet strength and stubborn integrity, with a legal bond that would shield her sisters from Holt's greed. If we do this, she said slowly, I want it done properly. Not some rushed courthouse ceremony that looks like we're trying to hide something. Nathan's eyebrows rose. What are you saying? I'm saying if we're going to present ourselves as a legitimate family, we do it right. We marry before the hearing, in front of witnesses, in a way that no one can question. A slow smile crossed Nathan's face. Is that a yes? Maylene took a deep breath. It's a yes. The next morning, Nathan rode out before dawn and returned 3 hours later with Pastor Collins from Silver Creek, the next town over. Collins was an older man with kind eyes and a practical manner, someone Nathan had known for years. Nathan explained the situation, Collins said as he stood in the warm kitchen, accepting coffee from Maylene's shaking hands. I want you to know, Miss Zhao, that I'll only perform this ceremony if you're entering it of your own free will. No coercion, no pressure. Maylene met his eyes steadily. I choose this for my sisters and for myself. Collins nodded, seeming satisfied. Then let's make it official. They gathered in the main room, Nathan and Maylene standing before the fireplace, Lena and Suyin as witnesses, Pastor Collins with his worn Bible. There were no flowers, no fine clothes, no guests. Just the simple words that bound 2 lives together. Do you, Nathan Hale, take Maylene Zhao as your lawfully wedded wife to honor and protect, In hardship and in plenty, for as long as you both shall live? Nathan's voice was steady. I do. And do you, Maylene Zhao, take Nathan Hale as your lawfully wedded husband to honor and stand beside in hardship and in plenty, for as long as you both shall live? Maylene thought about the journey that had brought her here, from her parents' death to the brutal mining camps, from Holt's storage room to this warm house, with a man who'd shown her more respect in 2 months than most had shown in her entire life. I do, she said clearly. Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Colin smiled. You may seal your union with a kiss. Nathan's eyes met Maylene's, a question in them. She nodded slightly, and he leaned forward, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was brief and gentle, and somehow carried the weight of a promise neither of them fully understood yet. When they stepped apart, Suyin was crying happy tears, and Lena was smiling for the first time in what felt like years. Pastor Collins prepared the marriage certificate with careful precision, signing it and having them sign as well, with Lena and Suyin adding their marks as witnesses. This is a legal document now, Collins said, handing it to Nathan. Anyone who questions the legitimacy of this union will have to answer to the territorial registry and to me personally. After Collins left, Maylene stood holding the certificate, staring at her new name written in careful script, Maylene Hale. Strange, isn't it? Nathan said quietly beside her. How quickly everything can change. Is it change if it feels like it was always meant to be this way? The words slipped out before Maylene could stop them. Nathan turned to look at her, something warm and wondering in his expression. No, he said softly. I suppose it's not. The days before the hearing passed in a strange blur of normalcy and tension. They maintained their separate rooms, their careful boundaries, but there was a new awareness between them now, glances that lasted a moment too long, hands that brushed during shared tasks, conversations that went deeper than before. Nathan taught Maylene to shoot, spending hours behind the barn showing her how to hold the rifle, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. His hand steadied hers, his voice low and patient in her ear, and she tried not to think about how safe she felt standing inside the circle of his arms. In the evenings, they sat together planning what to say at the hearing, going over every possible question, every angle Holt might use. He'll try to paint you as a victim, Nathan said, someone I've taken advantage of. You need to make it clear that you chose this, that you have agency. I'll tell them the truth, Maylene replied, that you gave us dignity when others saw us as property. You might bring up the money, make it sound like I bought you. You paid for our freedom from a man who would have sold us separately. There's a difference. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that still felt new but was becoming familiar. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known, he said. But that courtroom is going to be hostile. Are you ready for that? Maylene squeezed his hand. I've been facing hostile rooms my whole life. At least this time I won't be alone. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear. They dressed carefully, Nathan in his one good suit, Maylene in a simple but clean dress she'd made from fabric Nathan had quietly purchased on his last supply run. Lena and Suyin wore their best clothes, and despite their fear, they held their heads high. The ride to Bentley Creek felt both endless and too short. As they approached the town, Maylene could see people gathering outside the territorial courthouse, a sturdy building at the end of Main Street. Word had spread. This was going to be a spectacle. Nathan helped her down from the wagon, and she felt the weight of 100 stairs. But this time, she also felt the solid presence of Nathan beside her, the legal protection of her new name, the strength of her sisters behind her. They walked into the courthouse together. The interior was a single large room with benches for spectators and a raised platform where Magistrate Lawson sat behind a heavy desk. He was a severe-looking man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a skeptical expression. To his right sat a clerk, ready to record the proceedings. Edgar Holt was already there, dressed in his finest clothes, standing with a lawyer, a thin man with calculating eyes who Maylene recognized as Vernon Cross, someone Nathan had warned her about. Ah, Mr. Hale, Cross said with an oily smile. And the woman in question, how convenient that you've arrived. We were summoned, Nathan said flatly. We're here to answer whatever questions the magistrate has. Magistrate Lawson banged his gavel. This hearing will come to order. Mr. Cross, you filed this complaint on behalf of your client, Edgar Holt. State your case. Cross stood, all performance, and practiced outrage. Your Honor, my client is a respected businessman who took in 3 orphaned sisters out of the goodness of his heart, providing them food and shelter when they had nothing. In return for his charity, Mr. Nathan Hale paid him a sum of money and removed these girls to his remote ranch, where they've been living in questionable circumstances for the past 2 months. Murmurs ran through the spectators. My client has reason to believe these young women, particularly the minor children, are being exploited, Cross continued. He seeks the court's intervention to ensure their safety and proper guardianship. Magistrate Lawson turned to Nathan. Mr. Hale, what do you say to these allegations? Nathan stood. I say they're lies designed to extort money, Your Honor. Mr. Holt didn't provide charity. He provided a storage room and table scraps in exchange for hard labor. When I encountered these sisters, they were being publicly offered to any man willing to pay. I paid Mr. Holt his asking price to ensure they wouldn't be separated, and I've provided them with honest employment, fair wages, and safe housing ever since. Employment, Cross scoffed. Your Honor, this is a single man living in isolation with 3 foreign women, including 2 minors. The very situation is improper by any standard of decency. We ask that the court remove these girls from Mr. Hale's custody and place them in proper care. And where would that be? Nathan's voice was hard. With your client, who wants his money back. Or maybe split them up, send them to separate families like their livestock to be distributed? Gentlemen, Lawson banged his gavel. This is a court of law, not a street brawl. Mr. Cross, do you have evidence of actual exploitation, harm, mistreatment? Cross faltered slightly. Your Honor, the impropriety of the situation itself is, I asked for evidence, not speculation. We have testimony that Mr. Hale and the eldest woman, Meilin Zhao, share living quarters in a manner suggesting, that's a lie, Meilin said, standing up. Her voice rang clear in the courtroom. And I'll thank you not to make accusations you can't prove. Magistrate Lawson's eyebrows rose. Miss Zhao, you'll have your chance to speak. Please sit down. It's Mrs. Hale, Nathan said quietly. We were married 3 days ago, by Pastor Collins of Silver Creek. The courtroom exploded into noise. Cross's face went red. Holt shot to his feet, sputtering protests. Lawson banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. You were married? Lawson demanded. Nathan pulled out the certificate and handed it to the clerk, who verified it and passed it to the magistrate. Lawson examined it carefully, his expression unreadable. This appears to be legitimate, he said finally. Properly witnessed and registered. This is convenient timing, Cross said coldly, almost as if they knew this hearing was coming and rushed into marriage to avoid scrutiny. Or, Nathan replied, we married because we wanted to formalize a partnership that was already working, because we wanted to ensure Meilin's sisters had legal protection as family, because we chose to build a life together. Let me speak. Meilin's voice cut through the arguments. She stood again, and this time, Magistrate Lawson didn't tell her to sit. Let me tell you what happened, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Mr. Holt did not take us in out of kindness. He bought us from the mining camp where our parents died, brought us to his store, and worked us like animals. We slept in a freezing storage room. We ate whatever scraps were left over. We had no wages, no hope, no future. The courtroom was silent now, everyone leaning forward to hear. Then winter came, and Mr. Holt decided we were more trouble than we were worth, so he stood us on a platform in the cold and invited men to bid on us, separately. He was going to split apart the only family we had left. Meilin's voice grew stronger, fueled by months of suppressed anger and fear. Nathan Hale was the only man in that crowd who saw us as human beings. He paid for all 3 of us together, and he took us to his ranch. And you want to know what happened there? She looked directly at Magistrate Lawson. He gave us dignity. He gave us our own room with a lock on the inside of the door. He paid us wages for our work. He treated us with respect. And when this town started spreading lies about us, he offered to marry me to protect my family. She turned to face the crowd, to face the staring eyes and judgmental faces. You call this situation improper? I call it the first time in my life I've been treated like a person instead of property. Nathan Hale has shown me more honor in 2 months than most of you have shown anyone who looks different or speaks different in your entire lives. Someone in the crowd cleared their throat uncomfortably. Others looked away. So yes, I married him, Maylene continued. Not because I had to, because I wanted to, because he's a good man who deserves a family, and my sisters and I deserve a home where we're safe and valued. If that offends your sense of propriety, I suggest you examine why the idea of people being treated with basic human decency bothers you so much. She sat down, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Magistrate Lawson spoke. Mr. Cross, does your client have any actual evidence of wrongdoing? Any testimony from the women themselves that they've been harmed or exploited? Cross looked at Holt, who shook his head tightly, his face purple with rage. Then it seems to me, Lawson continued, that what we have here is a legal marriage between two adults and the lawful care of minor relatives. Unless you can demonstrate actual harm or illegal activity, this court has no grounds to intervene. But, Your Honor, furthermore, Lawson spoke over Cross's protest, it seems to me that Mr. Holt's motivations in bringing this case are suspect. He received payment for the transfer of guardianship, and now he seeks to interfere with a legitimate family arrangement. This smacks of harassment. Holt surged to his feet. Those girls are property. I had legal rights to them. And Hale stole— People are not property, Mr. Holt. Lawson's voice cracked like a whip. Not anymore. The war settled that question. If you persist in that line of thinking, we can discuss whether you violated territorial laws regarding human trafficking. Holt's face went white. Cross grabbed his arm, whispering urgently. Magistrate Lawson looked down at his notes, then back up at the courtroom. I find no evidence of wrongdoing in the Hale household. The marriage is legitimate, the family arrangement is lawful, and Mr. Holt's complaint is dismissed. He banged his gavel. This hearing is concluded. The room erupted in noise, some approving, some outraged. Maylene felt Nathan's hand find hers under the edge of the table, squeezing tight. They'd won. As people filed out of the courtroom, Maylene saw Mrs. Fletcher in the crowd. The woman's expression was complicated, shame mixed with something that might have been grudging respect. Holt stormed out without a backward glance, Cross hurrying after him. But as Holt passed Nathan and Maylene, he paused, his voice low and venomous. This isn't over, he hissed. You think you've won? You think one magistrate's ruling changes anything? I'll make you regret this. Nathan stepped forward, placing himself between Holt and Maylene. His voice was quiet but carried an edge of absolute certainty. You come near my family again, and we'll have a different kind of conversation. You understand me? For a moment, hatred and fear warred on Holt's face. Then he spat on the floor and left. Outside the courthouse, Suyin threw herself at Maylene, crying with relief. Lena stood nearby, her young face fierce with pride. You were amazing, Lena said. The way you spoke to them, you weren't afraid at all. I was terrified, Maylene admitted. But sometimes you have to speak truth, even when your voice shakes. Nathan was checking the wagon, giving them space for their reunion. But when Maylene approached him, he turned, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Thank you, he said quietly, for what you said in there, for defending this family. It's my family too now, Maylene replied, legally and every other way that matters. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of what they'd built together, what they'd defended, what they were becoming. The ride home was filled with lighter hearts despite the cold. Even the landscape seemed less harsh, the winter sun catching on snow and transforming it into something beautiful. As the ranch came into view, Maylene realized that the word Nathan had used earlier was true. This wasn't just a place they lived, it was home. And they'd fought for it together and won. The victory in the courtroom should have brought peace, but Maylene couldn't shake the memory of Edgar Holt's parting threat. His words echoed in her mind during the quiet moments, when she was kneading bread, when she was feeding the chickens, when she lay awake at night listening to the wind rattle the shutters. Nathan noticed. Of course he noticed. You're worried, he said one evening as they sat by the fire after the girls had gone to bed. It had become their habit now, these quiet hours together, though they still maintained their separate rooms. Holt meant what he said, Maylene replied, her hands stilling on the sock she was darning. Men like him don't accept defeat gracefully. No, they don't. Nathan set down the harness he was mending. But the law's on our side now. The marriage is legitimate. The magistrate dismissed his case. What can he do? I don't know. That's what worries me. Nathan was quiet for a moment, then moved to sit beside her on the bench instead of across the room in his chair. The shift felt significant, a deliberate crossing of invisible boundaries. Listen to me, he said, his voice low and serious. I meant what I said outside that courthouse. I'll protect this family. Whatever Holt tries, we'll face it together. Maylene looked at him, really looked at him. In the firelight, his face was all strong lines and shadows, but his eyes were gentle. She thought about how much had changed since that day on the platform in Bentley Creek, how this man who'd been a stranger had become someone she trusted more than anyone she'd ever known. I believe you, she said softly. But Nathan, I need you to understand something. I'm not just worried about what Holt might do to us. I'm worried about what defending us might cost you. Your reputation, your standing in the territory, your— None of that matters, he interrupted. None of it. It should matter. This is your home, your land. You've built a life here. A life that was empty until you came, Nathan said, and the raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch. You and your sisters, you brought something back to this place that I thought died with Sarah. You brought warmth and laughter and purpose. So no, Maylene, I don't care what it costs. You're worth it. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Maylene felt something shift in her chest, a wall she'd built around her heart beginning to crack. Nathan, The sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. They both jumped to their feet as another crash came from outside, followed by the frightened whinny of horses. Nathan grabbed his rifle from above the door and moved toward the window, gesturing for Maylene to stay back. Through the frost-edged glass, she could see flames, small fires scattered across the yard, bottles broken and burning where they'd been thrown. "Stay inside," Nathan commanded, already moving toward the door. "Like hell!" Maylene shot back, grabbing the iron poker from the fireplace. "That's our home they're attacking." Nathan's eyes flashed, but he didn't argue. Together, they rushed outside into the cold night air. 3 fires burned in the yard, one near the barn, one by the water trough, one dangerously close to the woodpile. In the distance, Maylene could hear the thunder of hoofbeats retreating, could see the shapes of riders disappearing into the darkness. "The barn!" Nathan shouted, already running toward the largest fire. The horses inside were panicking, their screams piercing the night. Maylene ran for the water trough, plunging a bucket into the freezing water. Her hands burned with cold as she hauled it toward the nearest fire, throwing water onto the flames. Again and again she ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her dress soaking wet and freezing against her skin. Nathan had gotten the barn door open and was leading the terrified horses out one by one, his voice steady and calm despite the chaos. The fire near the barn was spreading, licking at the dry wood of the structure. "Maylene, get more water!" he called, and she was already moving, her muscles screaming in protest. The bedroom door flew open, and Lena appeared, her eyes wide with terror. "What's happening?" "Get blankets!" Maylene shouted. "Wet them in the trough and bring them here." To her credit, Lena didn't hesitate. She grabbed every blanket she could carry and ran outside, plunging them into the icy water before running to help beat at the flames. It took nearly an hour to get the fires under control. By the time the last ember was extinguished, they were all soaked, shivering, and exhausted. The barn had been saved, but barely. One corner was charred black, the smell of smoke hanging heavy in the air. Nathan stood in the middle of the yard, his face carved from stone, staring at the damage. His hands were blistered from beating out flames, his clothes ruined. "This was Holt," Maylene said, her voice shaking with cold and fury. "This was his revenge." "We don't know that for certain," Nathan replied, but there was no conviction in his words. Who else would— "It doesn't matter who." Nathan turned to face her, and she saw something dangerous in his expression. "What matters is they attacked our home, tried to burn us out, could have killed the horses, could have—" He stopped, his jaw working. "Could have hurt you." The bedroom door opened again, and Suyin appeared, tears streaming down her small face. "May, I'm scared." Maylene gathered her into her arms, holding her tight. I know, little one, I know. Nathan's expression softened as he looked at them. Get inside, all of you. Get warm and dry. I need to check the perimeter, make sure they're really gone. Not alone, Maylene said firmly. Lena, take Suyin inside and get her warm. Nathan and I will check together. Nathan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Maylene's expression stopped him. They moved through the property together, checking every building, every shadow. The attackers were gone, but they'd left their message clear. The Hales weren't safe, weren't welcome, weren't going to be left in peace. Back inside, with the girls finally settled and the door firmly barred, Nathan sat at the table with his head in his hands. Maylene had never seen him look so defeated. I brought this on you, he said quietly. By bringing you here, by marrying you, by standing up to Holt, I made you a target. Maylene pulled out the chair beside him and sat down. You gave us a chance at a real life. That's worth fighting for. Is it worth dying for? The question hung in the air, brutal and honest. Yes, Maylene said without hesitation. It is. Because what's the alternative? Running, hiding, letting men like Holt dictate how we live? She reached out and took his damaged hands in hers, feeling the heat of fresh burns. I've spent my whole life running, Nathan. From prejudice, from poverty, from people who saw me as less than human. I'm done running. Nathan looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw the reflection of her own determination. Then we fight. We fight, she agreed. The next morning dawned gray and cold, the yard still scarred by the previous night's attack. Nathan spent the early hours reinforcing the barn, while Maylene took inventory of the damage. They'd lost tools, blankets, and a section of fencing. More concerning was the psychological impact. The girls jumped at every sound, and Suyin refused to go outside alone. At midday, Nathan saddled his horse. I'm going to the sheriff in Silver Creek. This was arson, pure and simple. It needs to be reported. Will it help? Maylene asked, though she already knew the answer. Probably not. But it creates a record. If anything else happens, there's documentation. He rode out, leaving Maylene alone with her sisters and a rifle loaded and ready by the door. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Maylene tried to keep busy, cooking, cleaning, comforting Suyin when the little girl dissolved into tears. But her ears were always listening for the sound of approaching riders, her eyes constantly scanning the windows. When Nathan finally returned as the sun was setting, his expression told her everything she needed to know. Sheriff Morgan took my statement, he said, dismounting stiffly, but he made it clear there's not much he can do without proof. No witnesses, no way to identify the attackers. He suggested we might want to consider moving somewhere safer. Safer, Maylene repeated bitterly. Where would that be? Where can we go that men like Holt don't have reach? Nathan's hands gripped the saddle. He also mentioned that there have been other incidents, attacks on people who don't fit the town's idea of respectable, a family with a mixed marriage over in Pine Valley, a homesteader who spoke out against the mining companies, all of them driven out or scared into submission. So we're supposed to just accept it, pack up and leave our home? That's what they want. Nathan turned to face her, and she saw the fire back in his eyes. But that's not what we're going to do. Over the next week, Nathan transformed the ranch into something approaching a fortress. He installed heavy shutters on all the windows, reinforced the doors, created clear sightlines from the house to all the outbuildings. He taught Maylene and even Lena how to load and fire the rifle, how to recognize danger, how to respond to threats. But he also did something else, something that surprised Maylene. He started reaching out. The first visitor was unexpected, a family named the Callahans from a neighboring ranch 20 miles south. They arrived in a wagon loaded with supplies, new tools to replace what had been lost, building materials, food. Heard what happened, mister, Callahan said, a weathered man in his 50s. Heard what you said in that courtroom, too. My wife's sister married a Mexican fellow. Town gave them hell for it. We know what it's like. Mrs. Callahan approached Maylene with a basket of preserves and a warm smile. You stood up to them. That took courage. We wanted you to know you're not alone. More came over the following days. Families who'd heard about the hearing, who'd heard about the attack, who were tired of living in fear of men like Holt and his cronies. They brought supplies, offered help, shared their own stories of intimidation and prejudice. Nathan stood in the yard one afternoon, watching a group of men work on rebuilding the damaged section of barn, and shook his head in wonder. "I never knew," he said to Maylene, "all these years keeping to myself, thinking I was alone. I never knew there were others who felt the same way." "You gave them permission to stand up," Maylene replied. "By fighting back, you showed them it was possible." That night, with their new allies departed and the house quiet again, Nathan asked Maylene to walk with him outside. Snow was falling gently, covering the scars in the yard with fresh white. "I need to tell you something," he said, his breath clouding in the cold air. "And I need you to hear all of it before you respond." Maylene's heart began to race, but she nodded. "When I offered to marry you, I told you it could be an arrangement. Legal protection, nothing more. Separate rooms, separate lives." He turned to face her fully. "I lied." "What?" "Not about offering it," he clarified quickly. "I would have honored that arrangement if that's what you wanted. But about what I wanted. The truth is, from the moment you stood on that platform protecting your sisters, looking like you'd take on the whole world barehanded, I was drawn to you. And every day since, watching you transform this house, watching you care for your family, watching you face down a courtroom full of people who wanted to break you, I've fallen in love with you, Maylene." The words hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "I'm not telling you this to pressure you," Nathan continued, his voice rough with emotion. "You don't owe me anything. The arrangement stands. We can keep our separate rooms, our separate lives, and I'll never mention this again if that's what you want. But after the attack, after realizing I could have lost you, I couldn't keep it inside anymore. You deserve to know the truth." Maylene stood in the falling snow, her mind reeling. Love. He loved her. This quiet, strong, honorable man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing in return was standing here, vulnerable and open, offering her his heart, and the terrifying truth was, she wanted to take it. "Say something," Nathan said quietly, and she could hear the fear beneath his steady tone. "I'm scared," Maylene whispered. "I'm scared because I feel the same way. And I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be someone's wife in truth, not just in name. I don't know how to trust that this won't be taken away." Nathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. When she didn't, he took her hands in his. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "Scared I'll fail you, scared I can't protect you the way you deserve. But Maylene, I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. And we don't have to figure everything out tonight. We just have to take one step forward, together." Maylene looked down at their joined hands, his rough and scarred from work, hers small but strong. She thought about all the steps that had brought them here, from that terrible day in town to this moment in the snow. "One step," she repeated. Then, gathering her courage, she took it, literally, moving closer to him, close enough to feel his warmth. Nathan's arms came around her carefully, as if she were something precious that might break. Maylene rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady thump of his heart, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly safe. They stood like that for a long time, snow falling around them, the world narrowed to just the two of them, and the warmth they shared. When they finally pulled apart, Nathan touched her face gently. "We should get inside, you're freezing." But at the door, Maylene paused. "Nathan, I need you to know something too. The marriage wasn't just for legal protection. Not for me. It was because somewhere along the way, this stopped being temporary. This became home. You became home." The smile that crossed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. That night, Maylene lay in her bed listening to the house settle around her. Through the wall, she could hear Nathan moving in his room. The distance between them suddenly felt both vast and insignificant. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow they would figure out what came next. Tomorrow, they would face whatever Holt threw at them. Tomorrow, they would take another step forward. But tonight, she let herself feel something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. The following week brought an unexpected visitor who would change everything. Garrett, the man who'd brought the warning about town gossip weeks earlier, rode up to the ranch with news written all over his weathered face. "You need to hear this," he said, dismounting quickly. "The whole territory's talking." Nathan and Maylene exchanged glances. "Talking about what?" Nathan asked. "About Holt." Someone finally came forward. A woman named Mary Chen from the Chinese Quarter in Silver Creek. She's filed a formal complaint with the territorial marshal. Says Holt's been running a trafficking operation for years, bringing in Chinese workers and orphans, then selling them off to whoever would pay. Maylene's blood ran cold. Is it true? Marshall seems to think so. He's launched an investigation, already arrested 2 of Holt's associates. Garrett's expression was grim. Word is Holt knows the walls are closing in, and desperate men do desperate things. Nathan's hand found Maylene's. What are you saying? I'm saying watch your backs. If Holt goes down, he might try to take people with him, might try to settle scores before they drag him away. After Garrett left, Nathan immediately went into action. He sent word to the Callahans and their other new allies, asking them to keep watch. He doubled up on patrols around the property. He made sure the rifle was always loaded, always accessible. But despite the precautions, none of them were prepared for what came 3 nights later. Maylene woke to the sound of breaking wood and a scream, Lena's scream, coming from the main room. She was on her feet instantly, grabbing the poker from beside her bed. Nathan burst out of his room at the same moment, rifle in hand. Together they rushed into the main room and froze. Edgar Holt stood in the center of the room, a pistol pointed at Lina, who he held in front of him like a shield. His clothes were dirty, his face haggard, his eyes wild with desperation and rage. "Don't move," he snarled. "Don't either of you move or I'll put a bullet in her brain." "Let her go, Holt," Nathan said, his voice deadly calm despite the rifle trained on the intruder. "Whatever you think you're accomplishing here, this isn't the way." "Accomplishing?" Holt laughed, a broken sound. "I'm ruined, you hear me? The marshal's coming for me tomorrow. They're going to arrest me, try me, probably hang me, all because of you. Because you couldn't leave well enough alone. All because you couldn't stop treating people like property," Maylene said, her knuckles white on the poker. "This isn't our fault, Holt. It's yours. Shut up." He pressed the gun harder against Lena's temple, and the girl whimpered. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? So much better than everyone else, but you're nothing. You're Chinese trash that I should have sold off piece by piece." "Last chance," Nathan's voice was ice. "Let the girl go, walk out of here, and maybe you get far enough before the marshal catches up. Or keep threatening my family, and I put you down right here." "Your family," Holt spat. "Your pretend family built on lies and—" He never finished the sentence. Suyin, who no one had seen slip out from the bedroom, threw Barnaby the cat directly at Holt's head. The animal, terrified and angry, clawed and yowled, causing Holt to jerk backward in surprise. His grip on Lena loosened for just a second, but a second was all they needed. Lena dropped and rolled. Nathan fired. The rifle shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Holt screamed, the pistol flying from his hand as Nathan's bullet shattered his wrist. He stumbled backward, clutching his mangled hand, and Maylene was there, the iron poker catching him hard across the temple. He went down like a felled tree. For a moment there was only the ringing silence and the smell of gunpowder. Then Lena was sobbing, and Maylene was gathering both her sisters into her arms, and Nathan was kicking Holt's pistol away and checking that the man was still breathing. "He's alive," Nathan said grimly. "Unconscious, but alive." "Good," Maylene said fiercely. "He needs to face justice." Nathan tied Holt securely while Maylene comforted her sisters. When it was done, he looked at Suyin with something like awe. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said to the little girl. "And the craziest? Don't ever do it again." Suyin managed a watery smile. "I had to help. He was hurting Lena." "You saved her," Nathan said simply. "You saved us all." They kept watch over Holt through the remainder of the night. At first light, Nathan rode for Silver Creek to fetch the marshal, leaving Maylene and the girls guarding their prisoner. When the marshal arrived with Nathan and a deputy, he surveyed the scene with grim satisfaction. "Edgar Holt," he said, hauling the groggy, wounded man to his feet. "You're under arrest for human trafficking, attempted murder, arson, and about 15 other charges I can think of off the top of my head." As they dragged Holt away, he looked back at Maylene with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Yes," Maylene said clearly, "it is." And watching them take him away, she believed it. The monster who'd haunted them was finally being brought to justice. The threat was ended. They were free. The weeks following Edgar Holt's arrest brought a strange kind of peace to the Double H. the kind that comes after a storm has passed and the air feels unnaturally still. Maylene found herself waking in the middle of the night, listening for sounds of attack that never came, her body refusing to believe the danger was truly over. Nathan noticed, of course. He always noticed. "You're still not sleeping," he said one morning as she prepared breakfast, dark circles evident beneath her eyes. "Old habits," Maylene replied, cracking eggs into a pan. "Fear doesn't disappear overnight just because the threat is gone." Nathan moved to stand beside her at the stove, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. It was a proximity that would have felt uncomfortable months ago, but now felt natural, necessary even. "Holt's in a cell in Silver Creek," he said quietly. "The marshal says the evidence against him is overwhelming. Testimony from over a dozen people he trafficked or exploited. He's going to prison for a long time, Maylene, maybe for the rest of his life." "I know." She stirred the eggs, watching them solidify in the heat. "But knowing and feeling safe are different things." "Then we'll wait until the feeling catches up with the knowing," Nathan said simply. "However long that takes." The trial came 6 weeks after Holt's arrest, held in Silver Creek's largest courthouse with a judge brought in from the territorial capital. Nathan and Maylene made the journey together, leaving Lena and Suyin with the Callahans, who'd become trusted friends. The courtroom was packed. Mary Chen was there, the woman whose testimony had started the investigation, along with a dozen others, Chinese laborers, domestic workers, even 2 white families who'd unknowingly hired people Holt had trafficked. Each one had a story of exploitation, of promises broken, of lives damaged. Maylene was called to testify on the second day. As she walked to the witness stand, she felt every eye in the room on her, but this time the weight of those stares didn't crush her. This time she had truth and law on her side. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Dalton, led her through her testimony with careful precision. She told the court about her parents' deaths in the mining camp, about Holt purchasing them like livestock, about the months of unpaid labor and degrading conditions, about being displayed on a platform and offered to the highest bidder. "And when Mr. Haley paid for you and your sisters," Dalton asked, "did he make any demands, any conditions on your freedom?" "None," Maylene said clearly. "He gave us wages, privacy, and dignity. He treated us like human beings, which was more than Mr. Holt ever did." Holt's lawyer, a desperate-looking man clearly fighting a losing battle, tried to paint Nathan as equally exploitative, but his questions fell flat against the simple truth of Maylene's account. When she stepped down from the witness stand, she met Holt's eyes across the courtroom. There was no fight left in them, only bitter defeat. He knew he was finished. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 20 years hard labor in the territorial prison. As the bailiffs led him away in chains, he didn't look back, didn't make threats, didn't say a word. He simply shuffled forward, a broken man facing the consequences of his greed. Outside the courthouse, Nathan took Maylene's hand in front of everyone. Neighbors, strangers, witnesses to their testimony. It was a public declaration, and she squeezed his fingers in response. "It's really over," she said, as if testing the words. "It's really over," Nathan confirmed. "Now we can start living instead of just surviving." The ride back to the ranch felt different somehow, lighter. The winter landscape was beginning to yield to early spring, patches of brown earth showing through the snow, the sun staying in the sky a little longer each day. Everything felt like it was waking up, including Maylene's ability to imagine a future that extended beyond the next crisis. When they arrived home, Lena and Suyin rushed out to greet them, the Callahans following with warm smiles. Mrs. Callahan had baked a pie, and her husband had fixed the porch step that had been loose for weeks. "Heard the verdict from folks coming back from town," Mr. Callahan said, shaking Nathan's hand. "Justice was done today." They celebrated quietly that evening, the 2 families sharing a meal around the table that had once seated only one lonely man. Maylene watched Nathan laugh at something Mr. Callahan said, watched Suyin show Mrs. Callahan her drawings, watched Lena help serve the pie with the confidence of someone who belonged. This, she thought, this is what home looks like. After the Callahans left and the girls had gone to bed, Maylene and Nathan stood together in the doorway, looking out at the star-filled sky. "I need to ask you something," Nathan said, his voice careful. "And I want you to answer honestly, not just say what you think I want to hear." Maylene turned to face him. "All right." "The marriage," he began, then paused, choosing his words with obvious care. It started as protection, legal strategy. But now that the threat is gone, now that Holt can't hurt you anymore, do you want things to change? Do you want your own space, your independence back? Because if you do, I'll understand. I'll help you however I can, give you whatever you need to build the life you want. Maylene's heart clenched at the vulnerability in his voice, at the way he was offering to let her go even though she could see it would cost him everything. What if the life I want is here? She asked quietly. What if it's this? Nathan's breath caught. Then I need you to tell me what this means to you, because I've been sleeping in that room alone every night, knowing you're just a wall away, wanting to knock on your door and ask if maybe we could stop pretending this is just an arrangement. But I won't push. I won't assume. You need to tell me what you want. Maylene looked up at this man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing, who'd fought for her family, who'd stood beside her in courtrooms and defended her against a hostile world. She thought about the way her heart had started racing whenever he entered a room, the way she found excuses to work near him, the way his rare smiles had become the brightest part of her days. I want you to knock on that door, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I want to stop sleeping in separate rooms like strangers. I want this marriage to be real in every way that matters. The smile that spread across Nathan's face was like nothing she'd seen before. Pure joy mixed with relief and love and hope. I was hoping you'd say that, he said softly, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her. This kiss was nothing like the brief formal one they'd shared at their wedding. This was deep and real and full of all the feelings they'd been holding back for months. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Maylene Hale, he whispered. I have for a long time. I love you too, she whispered back, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. I think I started falling the day you chose all three of us when everyone else wanted to tear us apart. That night, the wall between their rooms became just architecture instead of a barrier. They talked until dawn, sharing stories from their pasts, dreaming about their future, learning each other in ways they'd been too cautious to attempt before. And when the sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow gold and pink, they watched it together from Nathan's window, now their window, wrapped in each other's warmth. Spring came to the ranch with a rush of green and growing things. The girls threw themselves into planning a garden, Lena meticulously planting rows while Suyin dug holes with more enthusiasm than precision. Nathan taught them about seeds and soil and the patience required to coax life from the earth. Maylene discovered she had a talent for it, for nurturing growing things. She planted vegetables, but also flowers, wildflowers that Sarah had loved, Nathan told her, pointing to a faded diagram in his sister's handwriting. Maylene followed it carefully, wanting to honor the woman she'd never met, but whose presence still blessed their home. One evening, as they worked side by side in the garden, Lena spoke up suddenly. May, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? The 13-year-old's face was serious, almost worried. Really happy? Not just safe, but happy. Maylene sat back on her heels, considering the question. A year ago, happiness had seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. Survival had been the only goal, safety the highest ambition, but now with dirt under her fingernails and the sun warm on her back and Nathan's quiet presence nearby and Suyin's laughter floating on the breeze, she felt something that went beyond mere contentment. Yes, she said, smiling at her sister. I'm really happy. Are you? Lena nodded slowly. I never thought we'd have this. A real home. A family. I never thought... Her voice cracked. I never thought we'd get to just be kids again, at least a little bit. Maylene pulled her sister into a tight hug. You deserve this. We all do. Nathan's a good man, Lena said quietly. I'm glad you married him for real, not just for protection. Me too, Maylene whispered. The news of Holt's conviction and imprisonment spread through the territory, and with it came unexpected changes. Other victims of trafficking began coming forward, emboldened by the successful prosecution. The territorial government launched investigations into several operations, and laws were strengthened to prevent such exploitation in the future. Mary Chen, the woman whose testimony had started it all, came to visit the ranch one afternoon. She was a small woman with steel in her spine and kindness in her eyes. "I heard what you said at the hearing," she told Maylene as they sat together drinking tea. "About dignity and worth. Those words gave me courage to speak up about what Holt did to my family." "Your testimony saved lives," Maylene replied, "including ours." "We saved each other," Mary said simply. "That's what we do. We survive, and then we help the next person survive. My husband and I are starting a workers' cooperative in Silver Creek, a place where Chinese laborers can find fair employment and legal protection. Would you and your sisters consider joining our advisory board? Your voices would mean something." Maylene looked at Nathan, who nodded encouragingly. "I think we'd be honored," she said. The cooperative became a passion project for Maylene, a way to transform her own suffering into protection for others. Once a month, she and Nathan would make the journey to Silver Creek, where Maylene would help interview workers, review contracts, and provide counsel to families navigating the complex legal system. Lena discovered she had a gift for languages and record-keeping and began helping translate documents. Even Suyin contributed, her artistic talents put to use creating educational posters about workers' rights. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat and color. The garden flourished, producing more vegetables than they could eat. Maylene learned to preserve them, filling the root cellar with jars of pickles and preserves, preparing for the winter that would come again but no longer seemed threatening. The ranch itself was transformed. With help from their network of allies, they'd rebuilt the damaged barn better than before, added a chicken coop that was Suyin's pride and joy, and even started planning a small bunkhouse for seasonal workers they hoped to hire come harvest time. But the biggest change was in the main house itself. Slowly, carefully, Nathan and Maylene made it truly theirs. Sarah's things were honored but no longer preserved like a shrine. Some were used, some were carefully stored, some were given to people who would appreciate them. Nathan's room became their room, with space for both their belongings. Both their lives merged into one. One night in late summer, as they lay together in the darkness, Nathan's hand resting on Maylene's hip, she felt brave enough to voice the question that had been growing in her mind. "Have you ever thought about children?" she asked quietly. "Children of our own?" Nathan was silent for a moment, his hand stilling. "I've thought about it," he admitted, "but I didn't want to assume. Lena and Suyin already make us a family. If that's enough for you—" "It's more than enough," Maylene interrupted, "but it's also not all I want. I want to see what we could create together. I want to fill this house with more laughter, more life." She felt Nathan's smile in the darkness. "Then we'll make it happen. However long it takes, whatever comes, we'll build that life together." 3 months later, Maylene stood in the kitchen one morning, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach, and felt the first flutter of new life. She waited until that evening, until the girls were asleep and she and Nathan were alone by the fire, to tell him. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. The joy on Nathan's face was incandescent. He gathered her into his arms, careful and reverent, and she felt his tears wet against her hair. "Are you happy?" she asked, echoing Lena's question from months before. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," Nathan whispered. "Grateful, blessed, terrified, excited, all of it." They told Lena and Suyin the next morning. Suyin immediately began planning what games she would teach the baby, while Lana, now 14 and increasingly mature, asked practical questions about timing and preparation that made Maylene laugh. "We have months to figure it all out," Maylene assured her, "and we'll do it together, like everything else." Winter returned, but this time Maylene barely noticed the cold. The house was warm and full of life, full of love, full of the future taking shape with every passing day. Her belly grew round, and Nathan took to talking to it in the evenings, telling the baby about the ranch, about the mountains, about the family waiting to meet them. The Callahans came to visit often, along with Mary Chen and her husband, along with a dozen other families who'd become part of their extended community. The isolated ranch that had once housed a lonely widower and his memories had become a gathering place, a symbol of what was possible when people chose dignity over prejudice, community over cruelty. On a March morning, exactly 1 year and 2 months after Maylene had first stood on that platform in Bentley Creek, she went into labor. Nathan sent Lena racing to fetch Mrs. Callahan, who had experience with childbirth, while he stayed with Maylene, his hand gripping hers, his presence steady as she rode wave after wave of pain. Suyin, too young to help but too worried to leave, sat in the corner of the bedroom, clutching Barnaby the cat and whispering encouragement. "You're doing so well," Nathan said, his voice rough with emotion. "So strong. Just a little more, love. Just a little more." Hours later, as the sun set and painted the snow outside gold and pink, their daughter was born. She was tiny and perfect and furious at being thrust into the cold world, her cries filling the room with sound. Mrs. Callahan cleaned her and wrapped her in one of the quilts Maylene had spent the winter making, then placed her in Maylene's arms. "Hello, little one," Maylene whispered, looking down at the scrunched red face and tiny fists. "Welcome home." Nathan sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, staring at their daughter with awe. "She's beautiful. She's perfect. She's—" His voice broke. "She's ours." "What should we name her?" Maylene asked. Nathan was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Sarah. If you're willing, Sarah May Hale, to honor both our histories." Maylene felt tears slide down her cheeks. "Sarah May Hale," she repeated. "It's perfect." Lena and Suyin crowded around to meet their niece, their faces full of wonder. Suyin reached out a tentative finger, and baby Sarah wrapped her tiny hand around it, causing the 10-year-old to gasp with delight. "She's so small," Suyin whispered. "I'll protect her forever." "We all will," Lena said firmly. "She's family." Family. The word that had once meant only loss and grief now meant everything. Meant the four of them who'd survived together. Meant Nathan who'd chosen them. Meant this tiny new life who represented their future. That night, with Sarah sleeping in a cradle Nathan had built months ago, with Lena and Suyin finally convinced to go to bed, Maylene and Nathan sat together in the quiet darkness. "Do you remember what you said to me that first morning?" Maylene asked. "When you explained the arrangement?" "I said a lot of things," Nathan replied, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "You said this ranch was too much for one man, that you needed help you could trust." She turned to face him. "You were wrong about something, though." "What's that?" "It was never about the ranch being too much. It was about life being too much to face alone." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for not facing it alone anymore. Thank you for letting us be part of your life." Nathan pulled her close, and she felt him shake with silent emotion. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You took a chance on a stranger. You trusted me when you had no reason to. You built a home from nothing and filled it with light. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever, a reason to wake up in the morning beyond mere survival." They sat like that for a long time, holding each other, listening to their daughter's soft breathing, letting the peace of the moment wash over them. The years that followed brought their share of challenges: harsh winters and dry summers, illness and injury, the normal struggles of frontier life. But they faced everything together, their family growing stronger with each trial weathered. Sarah grew into a spirited child with her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. 2 years after her birth, a son joined the family, James Nathan Hale, whose arrival was celebrated by an even larger community of friends and allies. Lena eventually married a young teacher from Silver Creek, someone who valued her intelligence and treated her with respect. Suyin developed a talent for painting and began selling her work, her art depicting the beauty of frontier life with honesty and grace. The workers' cooperative that Mary Chen had started flourished, becoming a model for the territory and eventually influencing policy at the territorial capital. Maylene served on its board for years, her testimony and advocacy helping dozens of families find safety and dignity. And through it all, through every season and change, the Double H remained home. The ranch where a lonely man had once kept himself isolated from the world became a beacon of what was possible when people chose love over fear, community over division, hope over despair. On a spring morning 10 years after that first fateful day in Bentley Creek, Maylene stood in the garden she'd planted, now mature and beautiful, watching her children play while Nathan worked nearby. The mountains rose in the distance, snow still capping their peaks. But here in the valley, everything was green and growing. Lena visited with her husband and their baby daughter. Suyin was away at an art exhibition in Denver, but would return soon. The house would be full again tonight, voices and laughter filling every corner. Nathan appeared beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. He did that often now, these casual touches that spoke of comfort and belonging. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Maylene leaned into his strength. "About how far we've come. About everything that could have gone wrong but somehow went right." "It wasn't somehow," Nathan said quietly. "It was you, your courage, your strength, your refusal to let anyone break you." "It was us," Maylene corrected. "Every step of the way, it was us choosing each other, choosing this life." She thought about that girl who'd stood on a platform in the freezing cold, terrified but defiant, shielding her sisters from a hostile world. She thought about the journey from that moment to this one, through fear and fighting, through courtrooms and confrontations, through the slow building of trust that had transformed into love. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked, a question he'd asked 100 times in 100 different ways over the years. "Taking the chance on me, on this place?" Maylin turned to face him fully, taking in the silver threading through his hair now, the lines that had deepened around his eyes, the face that had become more dear to her than her own. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "You gave me everything I thought I'd lost forever. Safety, dignity, choice. You gave me a home, a family, a future." "You gave me the same," Nathan replied, touching her face with the gentleness that had never wavered in all their years together. "You took an empty house and turned it into a home. You took a broken man and helped him heal. You showed me that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born to." Sarah called to them from the garden, wanting to show them a butterfly she'd found. James was chasing chickens, shrieking with laughter. Lena's baby was crying and her husband was singing to soothe her. This was life, messy and chaotic and beautiful and real. Maylene looked at it all, at the tapestry they'd woven from threads of survival and hope, and felt a profound sense of peace. They'd started with nothing but determination and a desperate gamble on trust, and they'd built something that would outlast them both. A legacy of dignity, of standing up for what was right, of choosing love even when fear seemed safer. "Come on," Nathan said, taking her hand. "Our family's waiting." Together, they walked toward the house, toward the laughter and chaos and warmth, toward the life they'd fought for and earned and cherished, toward home. The end.